December 17th, 1944. A frozen forest road east of Stavelot, Belgium. Oberstleutnant Rudolf Lehmann stood beside his immobilized Tiger tank, its engine silent, its fuel tanks empty. Around him, the spearhead of Kampfgruppe Peiper, once the sharpest blade in the German offensive thrust, sat motionless in the gathering dusk. The tanks that had smashed through American lines just 24 hours earlier now squatted like iron monuments to failure, defeated not by enemy fire but by simple arithmetic. Lehmann held a captured American logistics form in his gloved hands. The document, stamped and dated just 3 days prior, listed monthly ammunition deliveries to a single American ammunition supply point near Liège. The numbers made no sense, they couldn't be real. Yet here they were, typed in neat columns, signed by multiple officers, undeniably authentic. The Americans were delivering more artillery ammunition to one depot in 1 month than the entire Wehrmacht received for the Eastern Front during the same period. He had spent the past hour cross-referencing the captured documents with his own supply reports, searching desperately for errors that would make the disparity less catastrophic. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The comparison was not marginal. It was a difference of kind rather than degree. The document listed 12.3 million rounds of artillery ammunition stored at this single location. His own division, at full authorized strength, carried perhaps 15,000 rounds total. One American depot held more firepower than 800 German divisions. The road behind him stretched back toward the German border, littered with abandoned vehicles that had run out of fuel. The road ahead led to massive American supply installations that German forces had been ordered to capture. But those installations were empty now, their contents evacuated by American trucks that seemed to exist in inexhaustible numbers. The offensive had failed not because German soldiers lacked courage or skill, but because they had entered a war where the enemy possessed industrial capacity that made German military doctrine irrelevant. Lehmann was not a political officer or an ideologue. He was a professional soldier from a family that had served Prussia for 6 generations. His analytical training at the Kriegsakademie had emphasized objective assessment of enemy capabilities. For 3 years, he had fought on the Eastern Front, witnessing the gradual shift in material balance as Soviet production recovered from initial German advances. But nothing in his experience prepared him for what he was discovering about American logistics capacity. The journey to this moment of terrible clarity had begun 6 months earlier, though its roots stretched back to fundamental miscalculations about American industrial power. German intelligence had tracked Allied production since before the war, compiling reports on factory locations, output figures, and resource availability. But they had consistently, catastrophically, underestimated what America could achieve when fully mobilized. This was not mere incompetence. The assumptions built into German strategic thinking, shaped by Nazi ideology and Germany's own industrial experience, made American logistical abundance seem impossible, even fantastical. Germany's wartime experience colored everything they believed about military supply. By late 1944, the Reich had mobilized every available resource, stripped occupied territories of materials, implemented slave labor on massive scale, and pushed industrial capacity to what seemed like absolute limits. German factories operated around the clock, workers put in extended shifts. Production of weapons and ammunition had increased dramatically from pre-war levels. Germany was producing tanks, aircraft, and artillery at rates that would have seemed unthinkable in 1939. Yet despite this total mobilization, despite conquering, most of Europe, despite desperate intensification of production under Albert Speer's direction, Germany was losing the material war with accelerating momentum. The fundamental miscalculation had begun years before the first shot was fired in the West. When President Franklin Roosevelt announced in May 1940 that America would produce 50,000 aircraft annually, German leadership dismissed the figure as obvious propaganda. The assessment seemed reasonable based on available data. American military aircraft production in 1939 totaled fewer than 3,000 planes. The US Army ranked 18th in the world, smaller than Portugal's. How could such a nation suddenly increase production 20-fold? Reich Marshal Hermann Göring reportedly laughed when informed of Roosevelt's proclamation. Multiple historians cite Göring's assessment that Americans could only make refrigerators and razor blades, never the military equipment necessary to defeat Germany. Whether the exact quote was accurate, the sentiment was certainly real. German leadership genuinely believed American industrial capacity was unsuited for military production. This assessment seemed supported by observable facts. America excelled at producing consumer goods, automobiles, household appliances, but military equipment required different expertise, different organizational structures, different engineering approaches. German industry had been preparing for war since 1933. How could American consumer goods manufacturers possibly match German military industrial capacity? The Germans failed to understand something fundamental about American industrial potential that would prove decisive. The Great Depression had idled massive amounts of infrastructure across the United States. Factories sat empty or underutilized. Millions of skilled workers remained unemployed. Machine tools that could produce components for automobiles, tractors, or refrigerators sat idle, or operated at reduced capacity. What looked like economic weakness was actually enormous reserve capacity waiting to be activated. When Roosevelt called for military mobilization, he was not asking American industry to build entirely new capability from nothing. He was asking them to convert existing factories, rehire laid-off workers, and redirect machinery already built, installed, and proven. The infrastructure for industrial mobilization already existed, requiring only redirection rather than creation. Germany, by contrast, had no such reserve. By 1940, German industry was already operating at near capacity. The Nazi regime had been rearming since 1933, steadily expanding military production year after year. There was little idle capacity to activate, few unemployed skilled workers to rehire, minimal machinery sitting unused. German expansion could only come through building new factories from scratch, conquering territories with existing industrial capacity, or exploiting slave labor. The disparity in starting positions, American unused capacity versus German full utilization, meant that America could scale up production far faster than Germany could match. But German intelligence remained skeptical of reports indicating American production increases. Throughout 1940 and 1942, as America entered the war and began mobilizing, intelligence reports reaching Berlin remained incomplete and contradictory. Some indicated massive increases in output, tens of thousands of aircraft rolling off assembly lines. Others suggested continued economic struggles, labor disputes, inefficient production methods. The German High Command chose to believe the more comforting assessments, the ones that aligned with their preconceptions about American weakness. After all, Germany was winning. German forces had conquered Poland, France, Yugoslavia, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, and occupied significant Soviet territory. Why should German leadership fear a nation whose army was tiny, whose tanks were obsolete, whose industrial capacity was oriented toward consumer goods? This comfortable certainty began developing cracks in North Africa. When American forces landed in Operation Torch on November 8, 1942, German commanders expected to face inexperienced troops with inferior equipment. Early engagements confirmed German tactical superiority. The Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943 resulted in humiliating American defeats. German forces drove American units back, killed over 1,000 soldiers, captured substantial numbers, and seized significant equipment. But something troubled experienced German commanders. The sheer quantity of American equipment was unprecedented. Units that suffered heavy losses were fully re-equipped within days, sometimes hours. Vehicles, weapons, ammunition, supplies flowed in seemingly endless streams. German units that won tactical victories found themselves unable to exploit them because American logistics absorbed losses and continued operations without pause. General Erwin Rommel, commanding Axis forces in North Africa until March 9, 1943, began sending increasingly alarmed reports to Berlin. Each American infantry division possessed more trucks than an entire German corps. Supply installations captured during German advances contained food, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and equipment in quantities that seemed wasteful by German standards. Rommel understood that tactics became irrelevant when facing such massive material superiority. He urged withdrawal from North Africa entirely, arguing that Allied logistics made Axis defeat inevitable regardless of battlefield success. These reports were noted, filed, and largely ignored by High Command. Rommel was known for pessimism, for emphasizing difficulties over opportunities. Hitler personally rejected Rommel's assessments, insisting that willpower would overcome numerical disadvantages. But intelligence analysts could not so easily dismiss what they were seeing. Throughout 1943, as the war turned decisively against Germany on multiple fronts, the volume of concerning data increased exponentially. After the surrender of Axis forces in Tunisia on May 13, 1943, German intelligence conducted systematic interrogation of approximately 125,000 captured German soldiers. The debriefing team sought to understand not just tactical details, but broader patterns of Allied, particularly American, military capability. The stories prisoners told were remarkably consistent across rank and unit. Every interrogated prisoner described American supply abundance that seemed wasteful by German standards. They spoke of entire meals thrown away, vehicles abandoned after minor problems, supply dumps containing quantities that appeared unlimited. Medical supplies were available in abundance, including sulfur drugs increasingly scarce in Germany. Captured prisoners received better food as POWs than they had eaten as soldiers. Some accounts seemed so extreme that interrogators initially suspected exaggeration, but consistency across hundreds of independent interrogations made dismissal impossible. Officers and enlisted men, paratroopers and infantry all told the same stories of overwhelming American material superiority. These prisoner accounts could theoretically be dismissed as subjective impressions, but then captured documents began arriving in Berlin in greater numbers, and these could not be dismissed. Unlike POW accounts, supply documents were clinical, bureaucratic, undeniable. They were not meant to impress or intimidate. They were simply routine paperwork tracking supplies through the military distribution system, and the numbers they contained were apocalyptic for German strategic planning. One particular document proved especially illuminating. A monthly supply report from an American corps operating in Italy during autumn 1943 listed deliveries and consumption. The corps consisted of approximately 80,000 men, comparable to a German army corps. But the comparison ended there. The American corps had received 3.2 million gallons of gasoline and 800,000 gallons of diesel fuel during the month. German analysts compared this to fuel allocations for forces on the Eastern Front. Army Group Center, consisting of multiple corps with several 100,000 men, received less total fuel in a month. The disparity was not marginal. It was fundamental. The ammunition figures were even more devastating. The American corps had received 15,000 tons of artillery ammunition during the month. German corps received perhaps 2,000 tons, and that was considered adequate supply. The Americans were firing shells at 7 times the German rate, and crucially, this was sustainable. This was not special preparation for major offensive. This was normal operating procedure, routine monthly supply for regular operations. American artillery could provide fire support at rates that would exhaust German ammunition supplies in days, and they could maintain this indefinitely. The vehicle replacement figures told an equally disturbing story. During 1 month of routine operations, the American Corps had received 847 trucks, 127 jeeps, 43 tanks, and 68 artillery pieces as replacements. These were not additions to unit strength. These were simply replacements to maintain authorized equipment levels. The German army had received fewer tanks from total national production in the previous month. The mathematical implications were inescapable. If America could replace losses at this rate for one corps, and they had dozens deployed across multiple theatres, then total logistics capacity exceeded German production by orders of magnitude. Professional German intelligence officers approached these documents with methodical precision. They were trained to evaluate evidence objectively, regardless of personal preferences. The captured documents represented hard data that could be quantified, compared, analyzed. They began calculating systematically. If one American corps consumed supplies at this rate, and the United States had deployed dozens across the Mediterranean, Pacific, and preparing for operations in Western Europe, then total American logistical capacity was beyond anything Germany could imagine. Intelligence requested additional information from all available sources. What came back over following weeks, compiled from multiple independent channels, confirmed the same impossible truth. Agent reports from Switzerland and Sweden, neutral country trade statistics, technical manuals from captured equipment, analysis of serial numbers, and open-source intelligence from American newspapers all pointed to the same conclusion. American tank production told a particularly revealing story. In 1940, America produced approximately 4,000 tanks. German intelligence documented this figure and considered it unimpressive. Germany produced more, but by 1942, American tank production reached 27,000 units, a six-fold increase in a single year. Intelligence officers initially suspected these figures were propaganda, but analysis of captured equipment, prisoner interrogations, and agent reports confirmed the numbers, and 1943 brought even more shocking data. American tank production reached 37,000 units. Germany, by contrast, produced roughly 12,000 tanks in 1943. These German figures represented significant increases and required enormous efforts. Germany was operating at maximum sustainable capacity, yet Americans were producing more than 3 tanks for every one Germany built, and the gap was widening. Aircraft production statistics proved even more lopsided. Germany produced approximately 21,000 military aircraft in 1943. American production reached 86,000 aircraft, more than 4 times German output. The disparity was widening further. The Americans were building planes faster than German pilots could shoot them down, faster than German factories could replace losses. But perhaps the most devastating comparison involved merchant shipping, because it directly addressed what German naval strategy depended upon. Germany understood that logistics in global war depended fundamentally on maritime transportation. The Atlantic was the crucial battleground where U-boats sought to sever supply lines between America and Britain. If Germany could sink ships faster than they could be built, Allied logistics would collapse. The U-boat campaign was Germany's answer to American industrial capacity. Destroy the ships, and production numbers become meaningless. Germany tracked Allied shipping losses meticulously. In 1942, German U-boats achieved their greatest success, sinking over 6 million tons. This seemed devastating. Surely the Allies could not sustain such losses. The Battle of the Atlantic appeared to tilt toward Germany. Admiral Karl Dönitz confidently predicted sustained sinking rates would force Allied surrender. Yet despite these massive losses, Allied shipping capacity increased throughout 1942. The answer lay in American shipbuilding capacity that defied all German understanding. Captured documents referenced Liberty ships, standardized cargo vessels American shipyards produced at extraordinary rates. Initially, German intelligence dismissed reports as obvious propaganda. The claims stated American shipyards were building 10,000-ton cargo ships in average of 42 days. This was impossible, according to everything German naval architects understood. Ship construction was slow and methodical, taking months or years. Claims of construction times under 6 weeks violated every known principle, yet prisoners consistently reported seeing dozens of Liberty ships. Captured documents referenced serial numbers in the thousands. Naval intelligence assessment confirmed the impossible. American shipyards were indeed producing Liberty ships at reported rates using revolutionary methods. Instead of traditional riveting, Americans employed welding throughout. Instead of building sequentially, They prefabricated entire sections in parallel, then assembled them like enormous building blocks. They employed assembly line techniques never before used in shipbuilding. They built dedicated Liberty shipyards optimized for speed. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. They trained tens of thousands of new workers in specialized techniques. The results were staggering. At peak production, American yards completed 3 Liberty ships per day. In 1943 alone, the United States launched 19 million tons of merchant shipping while U-boats sank 3 million tons. America was building ships more than 6 times faster than Germany could sink them. Individual ships could be sunk, but the overall mathematics were devastating for German strategy. The Battle of the Atlantic was being lost not through any failure of U-boat courage, but through simple arithmetic. Germany could not sink ships fast enough to prevent American industrial avalanche from reaching Europe. These revelations accumulated throughout 1943 like hammer blows against German strategic planning. Each new piece of intelligence confirmed and amplified the picture of overwhelming American industrial superiority. Officers whose responsibilities focused on different theaters began analyzing American industrial infrastructure through available sources. What they found explained how such production was possible, but made the strategic situation even more hopeless. The fundamental asymmetry was overwhelming. The United States possessed approximately 40% of world's total industrial capacity. Germany, even after conquering most of Europe, controlled perhaps 12%, but crude capacity percentages told only part of the story. American industry was characterized by scale and efficiency that German industry could not match. A captured technical manual for tank production proved particularly enlightening. The manual described production at Chrysler Tank Arsenal in Detroit. The facility employed 10,000 workers, producing Sherman tanks on assembly lines based on automotive principles. Peak monthly production at this single facility reached nearly 900 tanks. By comparison, entire German tank industry in early 1943 produced approximately 600 tanks per month total. One American factory equaled Germany's entire national tank production, and this was just one of multiple American facilities. The manual revealed production methods German industry had never implemented at such scale. Tanks moved down assembly lines like automobiles. Subassemblies were produced in parallel. Workers specialized in specific tasks rather than having craftsmen build entire components. Specialized jigs and fixtures ensured components fit properly. The entire process was optimized for volume production. German tank production retained many characteristics of artisanal manufacturing. Skilled workers fitted components together. Tolerances were tighter, finish quality higher, individual craftsmanship more evident. German tanks were in many ways superior products. The Panther and Tiger tanks were formidable weapons that Allied tankers feared, but Germany produced approximately 1 Panther for every 15 Shermans America built. The mathematical reality made quality differences strategically irrelevant. A single Tiger might destroy 5 Shermans in combat, but if Americans could send 15, the Tiger would still be overwhelmed. This distributed American production model provided resilience. German centralized production could not match. If one Sherman facility was bombed, 10 others continued. Total production barely fluctuated. Artillery production followed similar patterns. Germany produced approximately 11,000 artillery pieces of all types in 1943. America produced approximately 43,000, nearly 4 times German output, while simultaneously supplying Britain, Soviet Union, and other allies through Lend-Lease. German forces noted American artillery support was overwhelming, not because of technical superiority. German pieces were often superior in design, but simply due to volume. Truck production represented perhaps the starkest comparison. Modern military operations require transportation. Armies move on wheels and rails. Supplies must be transported, wounded, evacuated, troops moved to threatened sectors. Military effectiveness depends fundamentally on logistics mobility, and logistics mobility depends on motor vehicles. The Wehrmacht remained partially horse-drawn throughout the entire war, with hundreds of thousands of horses providing transportation. This was not romantic attachment to tradition. It was simple lack of sufficient motor vehicles. Germany produced approximately 100,000 trucks in 1943 for both military and civilian needs. The Wehrmacht never achieved complete motorization. Infantry divisions typically had artillery and equipment horse-drawn. Only elite formations were fully motorized, and even these experienced vehicle shortages. America produced approximately 620,000 trucks in 1943, almost all for military use. American Lend-Lease programs delivered over 400,000 trucks to Soviet Union alone during the entire war, more than Germany's total truck production for all purposes during the conflict. Every American infantry division had more organic transport than a German panzer division. This disparity had direct battlefield consequences. American forces could concentrate supplies for offensive operations at speeds German forces could not match. When American units advanced, they maintained supply lines through massive motor transport that delivered fuel, ammunition, food, and spare parts continuously. The Red Ball Express, established after Normandy invasion, illustrated American logistics at scale. The operation deployed nearly 6,000 vehicles at peak, running continuous convoys on dedicated roads. Peak single-day tonnage exceeded 12,000 tons, with sustained averages of 12,000 tons daily during peak periods. This single supply convoy operation moved more tonnage per day than the entire German army in Western Europe received through all sources. German commanders, observing this through intelligence reports, understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. The Red Ball Express was not even America's primary supply system. It was emergency, measure implemented when rapid advances outran conventional methods. Yet this emergency backup exceeded German logistics capacity. The captured documents also revealed American petroleum industry capacity, and this proved particularly devastating. Germany faced chronic fuel shortages since war's start. The nation lacked significant domestic oil production, depending instead on synthetic fuel from coal and Romanian imports. The synthetic fuel program represented massive industrial effort, consuming enormous resources to produce gasoline from coal. German military operations were perpetually constrained by fuel availability. Strategic decisions about when and where to attack depended more on fuel stocks than tactical opportunities. The 1942 German offensive toward Caucasus was motivated primarily by need to capture Soviet oil fields. American forces operated without fuel constraints whatsoever. Captured supply documents showed units receiving allocations exceeding maximum possible consumption. American petroleum production in 1943 reached approximately 1.4 billion barrels, roughly two-thirds of total world production. The United States produced more oil than all other nations combined. Germany, with synthetic production and Romanian imports, produced perhaps 40 to 50 million barrels annually, less than 4% of American output. Steel production statistics underlined every other comparison, because steel is the foundation of industrial warfare. Weapons, vehicles, ships, infrastructure, tools, all require steel. Germany produced approximately 30 million tons in 1943, representing maximum output from German capacity plus captured European mills. The United States produced 80 million tons. America produced nearly 3 tons of steel for every 1 ton Germany produced. Combined Allied steel production approached 150 million tons versus German output of 30 million. A 5-to-1 advantage translating directly to weapons production. The steel production gap was not something that could be overcome through better tactics or superior training. It was fundamental resource constraint that determined maximum possible military production. Officers analyzing these figures spent weeks cross-referencing sources, searching for errors that might make the picture less catastrophic. They found none. Every source confirmed the same basic reality. They brought in other analysts, showed them data, asked for independent assessments. The conclusions were always the same. America possessed industrial capacity that made German production look like cottage industry. The abstract numbers became visceral reality in November 1944 when Allied forces opened the port of Antwerp. Suddenly, American supplies that had been constrained by beach logistics and limited port capacity began flooding into continental Europe at unprecedented rates. German reconnaissance flights and agent reports documented what was happening around the Belgian city of Liège, and what they discovered defied comprehension. The Americans were establishing ammunition supply points on a scale that made no tactical or operational sense by German understanding. A rational military force stockpiled ammunition near the front lines in quantities sufficient for planned operations, perhaps a few days or weeks of heavy combat. Maintaining larger stocks was inefficient, tying up transport and creating vulnerable targets. But the Americans were not following rational principles, as Germans understood them. Major Hans-Dieter Schumann, a logistics officer with Army Group B, received reconnaissance photographs of American depot installations near Liège in late November. The photographs showed row after row of ammunition storage bays stretching across multiple square kilometers. He attempted to calculate tonnage based on visible storage structures and standard ammunition weights. The numbers he derived seemed impossible, so he recalculated using different assumptions. The result was always the same. The Americans had stockpiled between 10 and 15 million artillery rounds at this single location. Schumann's hands trembled as he wrote his assessment. His division's artillery, when fully supplied, carried approximately 3,000 rounds total. The Liège depot contained enough ammunition to fully supply his division's guns 4,500 times over. One American ammunition supply point held more firepower than the entire Wehrmacht possessed on the Western Front. But Liège was not unique. As American forces advanced and German intelligence gathered more information, the pattern repeated across multiple locations. Near Verdun, Americans established another massive ammunition complex. Reconnaissance indicated similar scale, millions upon millions of rounds stockpiled in concrete bays and underground facilities. Around Charleroi and Mons, additional depot areas emerged. The Americans were not concentrating ammunition at a few locations. They were distributing it across multiple sites, each of which individually exceeded total German ammunition stocks. The specific incident that shattered remaining German illusions occurred in mid-December, just days before the Ardennes offensive began. A German reconnaissance patrol penetrated American lines near Soissons and observed an ammunition dump that intelligence later estimated contained 12.3 million rounds of various calibers. The patrol leader, Hauptmann Werner Hoffmann, watched through binoculars as American trucks arrived in continuous streams, unloading crate after crate of artillery shells. Hoffmann counted trucks for 2 hours. In that time, over 80 vehicles arrived, each carrying approximately 5 tons of ammunition. 400 tons of ammunition delivered to one depot in 2 hours, during what Americans considered routine resupply operations. His own division received perhaps 200 tons of ammunition per month when supply conditions were favorable. The Americans were delivering twice his division's monthly allocation to one depot in 2 hours. What stunned Hoffmann more than the quantity was the casualness of the operation. There was no sense of urgency, no indication this was special preparation for major offensive. Trucks arrived, were unloaded by crews who worked without apparent haste, and departed. New trucks took their places in endless rotation. The ammunition was stacked in bays with spacing that seemed wasteful by German standards, where every cubic meter of storage space was precious. The Americans had so much ammunition they could afford to store it inefficiently, prioritizing safety margins over maximum utilization of space. The concrete storage bays themselves represented engineering and resource commitment beyond German capability. Each bay was reinforced, blast-resistant, designed to contain explosions if ammunition detonated, accidentally. The construction of such facilities required cement, steel reinforcement, skilled labor, and time that Germany could not spare, yet the Americans had built dozens, perhaps hundreds, of these installations. When Hoffmann returned to German lines and submitted his report, senior officers initially refused to believe his estimates. The numbers were too extreme, too disconnected from German logistical reality. But his account matched other intelligence from multiple sources. Aerial reconnaissance, captured documents, and prisoner interrogations all confirmed the same pattern. The Americans had established ammunition stockpiles measured not in thousands or tens of thousands of rounds, but in millions. Artillery ammunition consumption rates provided context for understanding these massive stockpiles. American artillery doctrine emphasized overwhelming fire support. When American forces attacked, artillery preparation was not measured in dozens or hundreds of shells per gun. It was measured in thousands. During the siege of Aachen in October 1944, American artillery fired over 1 million rounds in support of operations lasting several weeks. In the Battle of Hurtgen Forest, which began in September and continued into December 1944, American forces expended approximately 3 million rounds of artillery ammunition. In a single day, during heavy fighting, American artillery battalions routinely fired thousands of rounds. One artillery battalion supporting operations near Metz fired over 3,000 rounds in a 24-hour period, more than some German divisions possessed in total ammunition stocks. The Americans could sustain such fire rates because their logistics system delivered ammunition continuously. Forward ammunition supply points maintained stocks measured in thousands of tons. When frontline units requisitioned ammunition, supplies arrived within hours, sometimes minutes. American supply doctrine called for maintaining multiple days of supply at every level from frontline units back through corps and army depots. This redundancy meant that even if one supply line was disrupted, multiple backup sources existed. German forces, by contrast, operated on perpetual shortage. Artillery commanders received daily allocation limits, strict controls on how many rounds each gun could fire. Ammunition was husbanded carefully, used only when operationally essential. Preparatory bombardments that American forces conducted as routine procedure were, for Germans, special operations requiring high-level approval and concentration of scarce resources. The psychological impact on German officers who understood these disparities was profound. These were not defeatists or cowards. They were professional soldiers who had spent careers studying warfare, logistics, and military organization. They understood that courage and tactical skill, while important, could not overcome such fundamental material disadvantage. The numbers described a war that Germany could not win through any conventional military means. Oberstleutnant Lehmann, still standing beside his immobilized tank near Stavelot, understood this with crystalline clarity. The Ardennes offensive, launched with such hope just 38 hours earlier, was doomed by basic logistics mathematics. German forces had begun the operation with fuel for 6 days. The plan explicitly required capturing American fuel dumps to continue the advance. This dependency on capturing enemy supplies was itself admission of fatal weakness, but the Americans had evacuated or destroyed their forward fuel stocks. The massive supply installations near Spa and Stavelot, which German planning assumed would be captured intact, were empty or burning. American logistics flexibility, their ability to rapidly relocate stocks using vast truck fleets, meant that German forces could not capture supplies even when achieving tactical surprise. The irony was crushing. German tactical excellence, the successful breakthrough, the initial surprise, all became irrelevant because American logistics simply absorbed the disruption and continued functioning. Within 48 hours of the offensive's start, American forces were bringing up reinforcements and supplies faster than German commanders thought possible. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded at Bastogne, was sustained by air supply. German forces besieging the town watched as American cargo aircraft dropped supplies in quantities sufficient to maintain defensive operations indefinitely. The Wehrmacht had no equivalent capability. German logistics required ground transportation, vulnerable to disruption, limited by fuel shortages and vehicle availability. Americans flew supplies forward when ground routes were threatened, using aircraft for routine logistics tasks that Germans reserved for the most critical special operations. The ammunition dumps around Liège and Verdun represented more than just material stockpiles. They were physical manifestations of industrial and organizational capacity that existed on a different scale than German military operations. Every shell in those dumps had been manufactured in American factories, transported across the Atlantic Ocean on merchant ships, unloaded at European ports, moved by rail or truck to forward depots, and stockpiled for future use. The logistics chain accomplishing this involved thousands of workers, hundreds of ships, countless trains and trucks, all coordinated through organizational systems that functioned with machine-like efficiency. Germany had proven capable of tactical brilliance, operational innovation, and battlefield excellence. German soldiers fought with skill and determination. German equipment, particularly late war designs like Tiger tanks and jet aircraft, represented technological sophistication. But none of this mattered against an enemy who could lose 10 tanks for every one they destroyed and still increase overall tank strength, who could fire artillery at rates exhausting German monthly allocations in single days, who maintained ammunition stockpiles measured in millions of rounds at individual depots. The captured American logistics document that Lehmann held represented truth more decisive than any battlefield victory or defeat. It demonstrated that Germany was fighting not just against American armies, but against American industrial civilization. The contest was between German military excellence, supported by limited industrial capacity, versus adequate American military competence, backed by essentially unlimited material resources. In such contests, industrial capacity always prevails. The ammunition dumps near Liège, Verdun, and other locations were not anomalies or special preparations. They were normal operating procedure for American logistics. The 12 million rounds at a single depot, the continuous truck convoys delivering supplies, the casual wastage that German observers found shocking, all represented standard American military operations. This was not American forces operating at maximum surge capacity. This was routine sustainment of normal operations. By late December 1944, as the Ardennes offensive collapsed under combined weight of American reinforcements, air power, and logistics superiority, German officers who had witnessed American supply operations understood that continued resistance was militarily futile. The war would continue for another 4 months, but the outcome was determined by arithmetic established months or years earlier in American factories, shipyards, and industrial plants. The massive ammunition stockpiles represented not just current American strength but sustainable capacity. Those millions of rounds would be expended, and millions more would replace them. American production continued at rates that exceeded German output across every category of military equipment. The artillery shells, stockpiled near Liège, were being manufactured continuously in American plants, operating multiple shifts, employing hundreds of thousands of workers, consuming industrial resources that Germany could not match. German intelligence had documented this reality meticulously. They had calculated the numbers, cross-referenced sources, prepared detailed assessments. Professional officers had presented accurate analysis, showing that victory was mathematically impossible given the industrial balance. But leadership had rejected these conclusions, choosing ideology over evidence, willpower over arithmetic. The cost of that rejection was measured in millions of lives, destroyed cities, and Germany's complete destruction as a nation-state. The ammunition dumps that German officers observed in late 1944 were not just military installations. They were evidence of industrial capacity so overwhelming that no amount of tactical brilliance, strategic innovation, or fighting spirit could overcome the fundamental disparity. On May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Wehrmacht, once the most formidable military force in the world, was defeated not primarily by superior Allied tactics or battlefield excellence, but by simple mathematics of industrial production. American ammunition dumps containing millions of rounds, fuel depots with millions of gallons, vehicle parks with thousands of trucks, all demonstrated a truth that German intelligence had documented years earlier, but leadership had refused to accept. In modern industrial warfare, factories matter more than courage. Production lines determine outcomes more than tactics. And arithmetic always wins in the end. The German officers who stood before massive American ammunition installations in late 1944 understood they were witnessing not just military logistics, but the victory of industrial democracy over military authoritarianism. The 12 million rounds at a single depot told a story of inevitable defeat written in numbers that could not be argued with. Evidence of industrial superiority so absolute that continued resistance only prolonged the inevitable. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.